There is a clause buried in federal funding law called the current rate formula. It appears in no bill you've ever read, and it has quietly kept the entire federal government running, line by line, at spending levels no sitting Congress approved since 1876. You know it by its shadow. Every time you hear the government is operating under a continuing resolution, that phrase is doing enormous work. It sounds temporary. It sounds like a pause button. What it actually means is this. Instead of Congress passing 12 separate appropriations bills, each debated, each voted on, each accountable, one document rolls forward last year's numbers department by department and calls it funding. No new debate on the line items. No fresh vote on what the Department of Education actually needs in 2026. Just last year's formula copied forward, stamped current. Nobody designed this as policy. It grew out of a problem. In 1876, Congress missed its funding deadline, and rather than let agencies simply stop operating, someone wrote language allowing spending at a rate for operations already established. It worked, so they used it again and again. By 1884, Congress passed the Anti-Deficiency Act, the law that makes it a federal crime for any official to spend money Congress hasn't authorized. That law was meant as a guardrail. Instead, it guaranteed the current rate formula would never go away, because without it, the guardrail becomes a wall and the government simply stops. Here's who actually holds the pen now, not Congress. The Office of Management and Budget writes the anomalies, small technical adjustments tucked into each new continuing resolution, adjustments that quietly redirect money, extend authorities, or freeze programs, all under language so dense that fewer than a dozen congressional staffers per session actually read it line by line before the floor vote. Agency controllers interpret what current rate even means for their department. A missed deadline hands enormous discretion to people you did not elect and will never see testify. Now the part that should actually worry you. This formula doesn't just freeze budgets, it freezes decisions. Say a federal program was funded at a certain level 3 years ago under a Congress with a completely different set of priorities. Under the current rate formula, that funding level doesn't get reconsidered. It gets inherited. A pilot program meant to end in one fiscal year keeps drawing money for 4 more, not because anyone voted to continue it, but because ending it would require an active vote, and continuing it requires nothing at all. Meanwhile, real people feel the freeze directly. Federal employees get paid late, sometimes for months, and only get made whole because of a separate law passed after the fact, not because the system guaranteed it. Contractors don't get that guarantee at all. SNAP disbursements, VA claims processing, IRS refund timelines, all of it quietly throttled to whatever rate a previous, different government once decided was normal. You experience the consequences of a budget nobody currently agrees with, enforced by a clause nobody currently remembers voting for. And here is the part that should actually worry you more: it's completely legal. Every step of this was done by the book. This is why it cannot be repealed. Removing the current rate formula doesn't just change a policy. It removes the only mechanism preventing a lapse in appropriations from becoming an instant, total shutdown, with officials facing personal criminal exposure under the Anti-Deficiency Act for every dollar spent without authorization. Congress would have to replace it with something that does the exact same job, under a different name, which changes nothing about the underlying power. The formula isn't protected by tradition. It's protected by the fact that the law criminalizing its absence was written 142 years ago by people who could not have imagined what it would eventually control. Remember, no one voted for this. Not the formula, not its scope, not the agencies now interpreting it. And once you see it here, you start seeing the pattern everywhere. The Federal Reserve's emergency lending authority, executive privilege doctrine never once codified, judicial recess appointments practice. Each one began as a narrow, practical fix for a single bad week in government. Each one calcified into permanent structure because removing it looked more dangerous than living with it. The current rate formula isn't unusual. It's the model. Quiet defaults, dressed as emergencies that outlive every emergency that created them. So the question isn't whether this clause controls how your government spends money right now. It does. The question is how many other defaults like it are running underneath everything else you were told was a decision.